I want to talk a little bit about the roadblocks that we hit. Now, before I started full-time at Movara, I was a guest for a week. And I remember sitting in one of Michelle's lectures where she shared a quote about frustration. And she said, she was quoting someone else and I can't remember the original person, but basically it said that all frustration comes from unmet expectations. And I got to thinking about that and I thought that is very, very true. In all areas of our life, when we're frustrated with something, it's because our expectation of an outcome was different than the way it ended. And so I looked at that with our health, right? With our fitness and where we are at. What things frustrate us and where ultimately do those expectations come from, right? And usually if we're looking at the expectations, they're coming from external sources. They're coming from media. They're coming from advertising. They're coming from television shows that we see that show that 30 pounds of weight loss in a week is possible. And so in our mind, we are really motivated in that moment and we're really moved. But then when that doesn't happen for us, we get frustrated and we're right back to where we started. And so ultimately, I want to talk about the best way to overcome that hurdle of frustration is to set realistic expectations. And for me, the best way to set realistic expectations is focusing on the qualitative factors versus the quantitative factors. When we're talking about health, when we're talking about our diet and our exercise, usually the goals that we set are tied to something quantitative, something that we can measure. And having measurable results is important. But it can also be a source of great frustration if we feel like our results do not merit the amount of exercise or the amount of work we put in for those results. So I like to look more at the qualitative stuff. At the end of the week, a person that comes to Movara, that spends a week here, I always like to ask people when they test out, before we step on the scale, before we do the InBody, how do you feel? And how do you feel like you did this week? How does your body feel? And pretty much all the time, people's responses are, I feel better than I thought I would. I can do more than I could a week ago. I feel amazing. I didn't think I'd be able to do what I did here. And so I always tend to focus on those and say, keep those things in mind, because regardless of what the scale says, regardless of what body fat percentage says, that stuff is more likely to stick with you than a number on a scale. Because those things that are qualitative in nature, that's tied to the real reason, the real motivation of why we're doing something. So avoid that frustration by retooling our goals, focusing on the things of how we feel, what some of those goals are outside of the things that are measurable and quantitative.